I really didn't know where to put this today. Some people will come from other churches and they'll comment on how we do things, and I always appreciate that, even though they're not solicited. There was a guy visiting from another church in the area, and I had something in front of me, and he said, that you shouldn't have that there. I'm like, oh, I didn't know that. So now I'm really conscious about where stuff is. And so there it is. Is it okay? But we're beginning a new conversation this month, and it's about overcoming. And I love this quote that I ran across years ago, and it's been kind of something I've kind of stuck in my mind, if you will, and it's this aspect I want to talk about today, just the descending grace of God. And I want you to see that God's grace is subject to the laws of gravity, that it actually descends. And I think that's important to understand, that God's grace is, while it's lofty, and God's grace is rubber meets the road, has a gravitational element to it that actually meets us in our deepest, darkest places. Eugene O'Neill said that man is born broken. He lives by mending. God's grace is the glue. It's pretty true, isn't it? That we are born broken. The Scripture, of course, teaches that brokenness is that sin that we are born into. And as my old professor used to say, we're sinners by nature, we're sinners by choice. There's no way around it. We're born broken, and we live by mending, and God's grace is the glue. So today we want to have just a brief conversation about overcoming life's challenges. When you have this idea that we're overcomers, just that conversation has to be based in the fact that some challenge, so to speak, needs to be confronted, right? I mean, if there's no challenges in life, then there's no line of thinking that, well, we need to overcome. If we don't need to overcome anything, then there's no challenges in life. And I think most of us in the room have lived long enough to understand that this life comes with a few challenges. Fair to say? And good grief, probably everyone in this room, I think every person in this room has had something or going through something that's challenging. Is that fair to say? In fact, some of you have been to hell and back. More than once. Someone said, when you're walking through hell, keep walking. Don't stop. And some of you in this room, well, all of us to some degree have experienced things in life where we didn't see it coming. We weren't prepped for it. It caught us off guard. Now, there are some things that we see coming. We're like, okay, I want to brace myself for that. And God forbid what this potential hurricane could do on the East Coast. But there's that aspect of let's prepare while we can before it hits. And there's some things like that in life. But generally, I don't know about your experience, but my experience in life is that life didn't send out a bulletin saying it's all about to hit the fan. Now, sometimes I might have got that bulletin. Most of the times, I didn't get the memo. The cancer's here. The relationship's over. They've passed on. Life comes with some bulletins, but every now and then, that bulletin, that heads up, it's coming, often doesn't come, and even when it does come and we're prepared for it, we're really not prepared for it. But here's the reality. Everyone in this room is an overcomer. You're here, aren't you? Like, some of you aren't all here, but you're still here. Some of you just need, not right now, but after the service, walk into one of the restrooms, look in the mirror and say, hey, you're still here. You're still here. I don't know how I'm still here. I'm not sure why I'm still here. I didn't think I would still be here. But the reality is you're still here. That fact alone carries with it this idea that you've overcome some things in life. Yes? And we overcome those things in life by God's grace. The descending grace of God, the gravitational overflow of the grace of God. And God is turning that thing that the enemy's trying to bring about destruction and evil in your life, God's going to turn that into good. You're like, huh? That's a principle from Joseph's life, right? What the enemy intended for evil, God's going to bring about for good. Well, we're going to anchor this whole conversation for the next 5 weeks in the passage in John chapter 16. I invite you to turn there. This might just be a great passage for us to memorize over the next month. 1633. I'm reading out of the NLT, and I don't apologize for that, but you know, my reading comprehension isn't all that great. Have anybody else in the room like that? Man, I can read something and think, okay, what in the world did I just read? Anybody? I really should be preaching out of a children's Bible. That would be, no, and I'm serious. I can see the picture. Oh, I get it, right? So the NLT it helps me comprehend what I'm reading. Now, some of you are uber smart. Well, a few of you might be uber smart. Not me. So this passage, I'm reading out of NLT, and look here, this is right on the verge of Jesus going to that cross. This is upper room conversation. This is right before his amazing prayer in John 17. So he's having a conversation with the guys, right? And what he's really saying is there's a storm coming. There is a storm coming. And I like that about Jesus, right? You would think, hey, if Jesus wants me to follow me, what he's going to tell me is life's going to be all roses and rainbows and unicorns. Jesus doesn't do that. And don't you love that about Jesus? Like, hey, this is going to be difficult. He's like, in fact, you're going to die for this thing. So he's very upfront. There's a storm coming. Now look what he says here in verse 33. Speaking to the guys, he says, hey, I've told you all of this that you may have peace in me. Here on earth, you're going to have many trials and sorrows. Can we all, whether we're Baptist or not, can we all say amen? Amen. At least he got that right. If you're not sure what to think about Jesus, you're like, man, I don't know about Jesus. I'm not sure. You have to admit, whether you even believe in him or not, he got that right. If he got that right, maybe he got some other stuff right. You're going to have trouble. You're going to have sorrows. Now, other translations say tribulations. What does your translation say? Say it again. Troubles, tribulations, sorrows, difficulties. In this world, you're going to have those things. And he ends it with this powerful promise when he says, hey, but take heart. I love that. Say that with me. But take heart. I love that. But take heart. That's great counsel, isn't it? But take heart. Look at what he says, because, look at these beautiful words, because I have overcome the world. That's powerful. So that's kind of the anchor passage of the next 5 weeks. Jesus says, I'm telling you this, that you will have peace in me. The word peace means it has to do with the aspect of our soul, and peace doesn't mean the absence of conflict, right? It's not the absence of conflict. It really means the presence of Christ in our lives, because as we journey on this life, we experience a lot of conflict. And then he says, in this world, you're going to have these troubles, these sorrows, these tribulations. The word means to press, to compress. It actually meant in the first century when in the winery, when they would walk on the grapes and press those grapes and get that juice out of the grapes. That's the word that Jesus is using here. There's some times you feel like you're being stepped on, yes? And then he says, but take heart. That word means a confidence and a confidence. And then he says, take heart because I've overcome the world. I love that word overcome. It's the root word is Nike, where we get our word, the word Nikes. Anybody have any Nikes on today? Oh, I don't want to go. Okay, I didn't even think about opening up that can. Stop. Retract that from the record, okay? Retract that from the record. Yeah, my bad. I shouldn't even have gone there. But that's where the word came from, right? It means to overcome, to conquer, to be victorious. That's the idea here. Phil Knight was not the first guy to come up with this idea, okay? This was a great New Testament word, and so that's kind of the core basic of what the conversation is about. Now, I want to do a little bit of a case study here for a few minutes and encourage you with, like, Pastor, okay, I got this thing going on in my life. Would you raise your hand? I got this thing going on in my life. It's financial, it's emotional, it's relational, it's health related. I got this thing going on in my life. And before you had this thing, you probably had a prior thing. Will you raise your hand to that? And before that thing, what did you have? You had another thing. And as far as you can think back, you're like, I think I've had some things. You have some things. These things. Jesus said it's these things. I'm telling you about these things. These things. And as you think back in your life and you're like, well, I've got this thing. You kind of forgot a little bit about the other thing because you got through that thing and now you have a new thing. Here's the reality of being human. Once you get through this thing, it's likely there's another thing coming. So it's always something, never nothing, it feels like, in humanity. But the encouraging part, the encouraging part is we're going to do a little case study in the guy's life briefly, and we're going to extract something out of his journey that will help you and I live as overcomers. Now, I want to share one more quote that I think has been the most powerful quote that I've learned along these lines. It's by Oswald Chambers. God does not give us overcoming life. He gives us life as we overcome. A lot of this is based upon Revelation. The book of Revelation, there are 7 promises to overcomers. In fact, the last message in the series, I may talk about that. 7 promises to those who overcome in the book of Revelations in the early chapters. And Chambers kind of took this idea that God does not give us an overcoming life, which is what I want. You too? I want that. But the reality is, Chambers argues that God gives us life as we overcome. So let's do a brief case study here. And so to do this, we're going to go to the book of 2 Corinthians. I'm just going to highlight a few things in the book of 2 Corinthians. And why don't you turn there with me? 2 Corinthians chapter 12. It would help. 11 and 12, right? You're like, okay, Pastor, get a little more specific. 2 Corinthians chapters 11 and 12. So if you were to read chapter 11 of 2 Corinthians, Paul's kind of diving into some of his life challenges, right? A lot of it has to do with false apostles. Those were kind of an issue in Paul's life. But then he goes on, in verse 16, he kind of lists out his trials, the things he's been through. Right? And some of you in the room, we all could make a pretty good list of things that we've been through. All right? And so, hey, let me just pick it up there in verse 21, second part. Paul says, but whatever they dare to boast about, speaking about the false prophets, I'm talking like a fool again. I dare to boast about it too. Are they Hebrews? So am I. Are they Israelites? So am I. Are they descendants of Abraham? Check. Verse 23, are they servants of Christ? Yep. I know I sound like a madman. I love it, don't you? I know I sound like I'm crazy here, but I have served him far more. Now here comes the list. Check out this list. I've worked harder. I've been put in prison more often. I've been whipped times without number. I have faced death again and again. 5 times the Jewish leaders gave me 39 lashes. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was stoned. 3 times I was shipwrecked. Once I spent a whole day and night adrift at sea. I've traveled on many long journeys. I've faced danger from rivers, from robbers, from my own people, from the Jews, the Gentiles. I've faced dangers in the cities, in the deserts, and on the seas. I have faced danger from men who claim to be believers, but they are not. I've worked long and hard and doing sleepless nights, been hungry, been thirsty, gone without food, shivered in the cold, without enough clothing to keep me warm. Hello. What a list, right? You're like, what? I'm exhausted just reading that. But look at what he says in verse 28. Then, on top of that, here's the icing on the cake. Look at what he says. I have the daily burden of my concern for all the churches. On top of all that other craziness, I really am worried and concerned about all of the churches that I'm connected to, have planted, and have kind of overseen in my journeys. So Paul reels off a pretty good list. Now, down in verse, let's go to chapter 12. And so I want to begin in verse, I'm going to go down to verse, let's go to verse 5. You ready? There you go. One's ready. If just one's ready, I'm going to bring it, all right? And whoever you are, if you'll just stand up, I'll just speak to you, sister. Everybody else just check out. I'm not playing around today. I know it's Labor Day weekend. I'm working. I'm going to get after it. Verse 5 of chapter 12. Paul's in this whole thing about this amazing vision. He's caught up into heaven. And if he come in this room and told that vision, we would run him out of here. We would say, bro, we got a little spot for you. It's an amazing vision. But look at what verse 5. He says, this vision is worth boasting about, but I'm not going to do it. I'm going to boast only about my weaknesses. If I wanted to boast, I would be no fool in doing so because I would be telling the truth. But I won't do it because I don't want anyone to give me credit beyond what they can see in my life or hear in my message. Verse 7, even though I have received such wonderful revelations from God. So to keep me from being proud, I was given. Say, I was given. Now this is a little sketchy. Paul is about to talk about what he was given. You understand? I was given something. Look at what he says. He says, I was given a thorn in my flesh, a messenger from Satan to torment me and to keep me from becoming proud. A lot of speculation on what this is. A lot of speculation on what Paul is talking about. Okay? Kind of across the board. He had a physical problem. He had an eyesight problem. He couldn't see very well, which some of the letters will talk about that very thing, some of his letters. So some thinks it's a physical issue. Some believe it's an emotional challenge. A lot of people think it's a relational challenge with false teachers and false apostles that were a thorn in his flesh. So there's some speculation about what the thorn is. And by the way, do we know what the thorn is? We really don't. He doesn't mention it. And that's the challenge with thorns in our lives, is that what we will do is when we're experiencing something, we'll put our thorn on the table, and then somebody brings their thorn to the table, and then she brings her thorn to the table, and we start comparing those thorns on the table, and now we begin to compare, well, my thorn's bigger than your thorn, and my thorn hurts worse than your thorn, and my thorn's sharper than your thorn, and we begin to compare the thorns. I think there's great intentionality that Paul and the Scripture does not give us the specific issue, because we might look at that and say, oh, but my thorn. Say, my thorn. Yeah, my thorn. And rightfully so. It's relative. Some of the stuff that you've been through is super challenging. And so we don't understand, we don't know what the thorn is. All right? Now look in verse 8. It's on the screen here. 3 different times, I love that, 3 different times, I begged the Lord to take it away. Don't miss that. How many times? Notice, not just 3 times, 3 different times. In other words, he's not in one moment of prayer and he asked the Lord 3 times, take this away. This sounds like on 3 separate occasions, Lord, take it away. Paul gets up, it's still there. He's back and he says it again, take it away, it's still there. He gets up, take it. It sounds like my life. Lord, take this away. I get up and there it is. You ever had that experience? And you're back on your knees. Lord, take this away. You get up and you said, oh, I know it's gone this time. And you turn around and there it is. You're like, okay, now wait a second. Hey, 3rd time's a charm, right? And you pray a 3rd time. Lord, take it away. Take the depression away. Take the lust away. Take the pornography away. Take the greed away. Take the pain of abandonment away. Take the pain of abuse away. And you get up off your knees, and where is it? Right where you left it. Now what do you do? What do you do? How do you move beyond that? Paul gives us the secret right here. Look at what he says. 3 different times. He said, I didn't ask the Lord. What do you say? Baby, I'm begging. This is so significant. I am begging God. Some of you have been there, haven't you? You've been so hurt. You've been in such a place where you begged God. You're no longer praying. You are sobbing your eyes out. Lord, take this away. And He didn't do it. The hurt's still there. The memory's still there. The pain is still there. Here's what I've learned about God's activity, is He generally does not deliver us from it. He will deliver us through it. He generally, just generally speaking, not saying He hasn't, He's actually removed some things supernaturally out of my life. But for the most part, it's more of a Red Sea thing. You remember that story, right? You guys are just going to walk through that. You know what? He didn't Uber them over the Red Sea. He didn't say, you guys board the helicopter, I got this. They had to walk through it. Now notice what Paul does, and we're going to close. Look at this. Look at what God says, right? Each time when Paul says, I beg this from the Lord, each time, every time, here's God's response. My grace is all you need. For in your weakness is where I'm strongest. My power is evident in your weakness. So Paul's like, now I love to walk around talking about my weaknesses so that the power of Christ can work through me. Until we embrace the struggle, I don't know if we'll ever know His strength. Because in that strain is where we find His strength. In that struggle is where we find His strength. A few weeks ago, I was up at, our kids were up at kids camp, and one afternoon I just was talking to the kids, interacting with the kids. You know, kids. Love kids. You love kids? You're not recording this one, are you, Stuart? Are you recording this one? Oh. Come back to the second service when Stuart isn't recording. I mean, I love kids, love children, all about the children. You about the kids? Went to kids camp. Went to kids camp, was up there hanging out at kids camp, hanging with the kids because I love the kids. And I thought I better show my face at kids camp because I'll get ridiculed for a year if I don't. Went up there, and this one young man kind of gravitated toward me, and we were hanging out. We were sitting on a rock close to where the dining hall was. We were just sitting there. Guys and gals were playing like a game of kickball. And somehow we got on the aspect of, hey, what music? What's your song? What do you like? I think everybody should have a song. I think everybody should have a song. I think if you're married as a husband and wife, you should have a song. You should have a song. I think everybody should have a song. I was talking with this little guy, and I knew a little bit about his life, and he's pretty young. I'm going to tell you, he's been through it. He's been through it. And I just wanted to talk with him and just maybe encourage him. And I'm like, hey, man, what's your song? What's your song? Oh, Pastor, my song is a song that said, God only knows. God only knows. It's a song for king and country. I want you to listen to some of the lyrics. Because some of you in this room today, there's some stuff in your life that God only knows. It's deep. It's dark. You need to experience the descending grace of God. Let the gravity of God. Paul, in the dark, one of the darkest moments recorded in his life. There were probably darker moments, but in this moment, God's words to him was, "My grace is enough." Listen to the words by this song, just a couple verses. Song begins like this: "Wide awake while the world is a-sleepin', too afraid of what might show up while you're dreaming. Nobody sees you. Nobody would believe you. Every day you try to pick up all the pieces, all the memories, they somehow never leave you. Nobody sees you. Nobody would believe you." It pains me for him to think nobody even sees him. That pains me. The chorus goes like this: "God only knows what you've been through. God only knows what they say about you. God only knows how it's killing you, but there's a kind of love that God only knows." Amen? God only knows what you've been through. God only knows what they say about you. God only knows the real you. There's a kind of love that God only knows. The song ends with these words: "God only knows where to find you. God only knows how to break through. God only knows the real you. There's a kind of love that God only knows." I want to end with this passage, and then they're going to lead us in a worship song in Psalms 139. I'm going to read from verse 7 down through verse 12, so I'm going to read a little more than is on the screen. Psalms 139. The descending grace of God. Listen to what the psalmist says. "I can never escape from your spirit. I can never get away from your presence. If I go up to the heaven, you're there. If I go down to the grave, you're there. If I ride the wings of the morning, if I dwell by the farthest oceans, even there your hand will guide me, and your strength will support me. I could ask the darkness to hide me, and the light around me become night. But even in the darkness, I cannot hide from you." This is David. "But even in the darkness, I cannot hide from you." Descending grace. "To you, Lord, the night shines as bright as day. Darkness and light are the same to you." I love that. It's a reference to the gravity of God's grace. Here's what some of you need to hear today. You need to hear the words that God spoke to Paul. "My grace is sufficient." You hear it? My grace is sufficient. Stop with that. Don't add a but, an and, a what if, and I'm not sure. Say it with me, God's grace is sufficient. It's what he told Paul. I guess Paul got up and said, okay, from here on out, that's my mantra. When he thought about God, he thought, your grace is enough.